It's me, Comic Crack, and in honor of Damien Sleepy Reader 666, he had his 9-year anniversary today. I thought I'd send out this message in a bottle. He was talking in his latest video about just kind of reflecting on how things have gone over his past 9 years and looking back at his early videos and talking about things that have changed. Pardon me, talking about things have changed. I wasn't doing that to mimic his video. The things that have changed in the 9 years that he's kind of been on YouTube. And there was just a few points that I thought it might be fun just to do a short kind of video response like we used to do back in the olden days. And that's kind of the first part to start on. I think it is interesting seeing how things have changed. I'm not nearly as into the kind of quagmire of comic book videos like I used to when we started. I think that back in that time, it was quite a bit easier, or at least from my perspective, it was quite a bit easier to keep track of the comic book videos out there because that community was really small. And I do agree with what he was saying, the kind of the videos that have taken over, like the live streams. Myself, I'm a huge proponent of the live stream video because I do like that live interaction. That live interaction kind of, I think for me, helps kind of keep it fresh. There's a little bit of immediate interaction if people happen to be around. Again, I'm not one that kind of broadcasts when I'm going to do stuff live, except for our kind of live weekly show that we've been doing now for quite a while. I just kind of, when the mood strikes me, I do a live video instead of when the mood strikes me sitting and hitting record like I'm doing here. So that's definitely been a big change, and it's interesting because even just in sitting down to do this video, there was a bit of anxiety about like, what should I talk about? Because it almost feels like when you sit and do a recorded video that there has to be some topic and there has to be something that you're going to tackle and something that you want to discuss. And because that was a big part of it. There was kind of these thoughts that people would have that they would share, because I know that it's gone back and forth. I've participated in some of them. Somebody has a nugget of an idea that then a couple of other people jumped on. And then, of course, there was the infamous kind of tag videos and things where there was a very specific call out to kind of the community to sit and have a conversation about something and everybody record their own thoughts. And actually, even just sitting here talking about it and thinking about it, there is a bit of excitement with that. That was a lot of fun. And I think part of that fun also at the time was because it was so new. For those of us who were starting out and making videos at that time, Damien touched on it as well. You know, there wasn't, I'm lucky in that I do have some people around me that do enjoy comics. So I have been able to have conversations with them at work and things like that. Even before discovering the YouTube videos in the comic community here. But it's different, you know, because this is purely focused on that, where there's other conversations, they're kind of real world conversations, and every once in a while you end up talking about comics. The draw here was these were all just people, men and women, who were just talking about comics, and that was the kind of main goal. And everybody had their little niche of, people that were specifically reviewing new books, people that were talking about older books, people that were talking about the kind of, there was definitely some speculator side to it. And I know that that's not necessarily the best word to use because they weren't full on speculators like we're seeing now. At least I don't think so. But they did have their toes in that, right? That was a draw, one of the draws for them. And just seeing how that's changed, and I think because the whole platform has changed and because of that interaction, I think that was the thing that was addicting. That interaction was it, when you started getting comments on your videos and there was a little bit of a discussion there, that became an extra thrill as well too. So then it led to the live video where then you could kind of have live hangouts with somebody and have a live conversation and have people commenting in the chat and things. And so it was really, really interesting. But yeah, it's neat the way things kind of grow. And like I said, I don't have much of a grasp on what's going on out there now. So maybe there isn't a lot of comic videos out there anymore. Maybe that speculator side has grown. I mean, I'm assuming that it has from the little bit that I do know. Things like you mentioned, the whole people doing live auctions, that seemed to have exploded for sure. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. And then a couple of other things he talked about. One of them being kind of like the distribution and Diamond and things, and the focus on some of the big companies. And one of the things that he said that I found interesting that made me think, well, there's no, they definitely aren't. He talked about how the focus maybe was a little more from the big two specifically, not just only them. There's other ones for sure that focus on it as well, but the focus being on that variant market and that collector's market and that kind of the things that led to the crash in the 90s, right? I mean, he was talking about, I wonder if they're still thinking about trying to find the next, Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, from my perspective on things, they gave up on trying to find those type of writers a long ass time ago. It's pretty rare in my dabbling in. I mean, it's not like they don't find good writers. They absolutely do, and that proof is there by guys like Jason Aaron doing a big run of stuff and that being a huge success, or at least in my eyes, a huge success. But it doesn't feel like they're trying to attract writers who are really pushing the boundaries. These are good writers that are working within their framework. These aren't writers that they're getting in to really take characters and really twist them. And I don't think that kind of thing has been happening forever. So my computer's telling me that it can't run this software, so I'm going to keep talking because it's still recording. The other thing with doing these recorded videos, I guess, is the downside of having a computer that's too goddamn old and not powerful enough to handle this sort of thing. So I think that hasn't been a focus for a long time. I feel like they are still focused on stories, for sure. I can speak more specifically to Marvel because out of the two, that would be the one that I dip my toes into the most over the years. And again, I point to a title like that Alex Ross Marvel book where it was different artists telling their own stories. There was some adventurousness there for sure, but I do feel like this variant market has just exploded. And thankfully it hasn't bit me in the ass too many times, but it has bit me in the ass a couple of times with buying multiple issues of the same issue number because it had different covers rather, and just seeing the abundance of covers. And he mentioned Berserker, and I think that's a phenomenal example because that is clearly, to me, a strategy of cashing in on that and cashing in on that market of these variant covers, right? And taking advantage of that to some degree, and then using that to make, then making the announcement about the movie, thus driving that market even more to get people to get those 1 in 1,000 covers, etc., to be able to hoard those and flip them and have everybody a part of the system. That feels like that's the new system. The new system is to generate and kind of hype up this group so they'll get excited about your book. Then they'll use that excitement to get other people excited about the project, who will then look for the books, and it just kind of gets everybody invested in that project. So again, using Berserker as an example, I think that there's a lot of people who bought that book who are going to be, who are already on board for the movie, regardless of what gets presented to them. So I think that has a certain buy-in that they're taking advantage of, and not taking advantage in a bad way, taking advantage because it's there. They're a business. Ultimately, they're there to make money. So they're utilizing those resources that are out there and those people that are steeped in that, right? So all that is it's just an interesting thing to think about. And kind of jumping off of that, he was talking about what potentially might happen to Diamond. And I mean, it feels like that's now an indie, there's still Image, there's still Dark Horse. We could have a completely separate conversation about how indie those companies are. To me, especially a company like Image, they're pretty much neck and neck with Marvel and DC, maybe not in sales wise, but in kind of how they're perceived, as kind of they're part of the big three, I guess. But I do think that there's potential there for more indies to get exposure in that. At least I hope so. If it's going to be focused on these indie companies, maybe there's more room, and maybe then Diamond has more of a drive to go and approach people to make it easier, because he did touch on that it's not always easy in the past to kind of get your stuff listed in Diamond. Now that they have that gap, they may have that thirst to make it easier, to try to attract people, to make sure that everybody knows, hey, come to us, because we now have this huge gap that we need to fill. And maybe that kind of balances things out a little bit. And then on the flip side, I think, part of that indie crowd is going to give them the big old fuck you. We don't want you, because you never accepted us or made it easy for us in the past. We've gone other avenues. I mean, even stuff that I'm buying recently, granted, this is more small press and kind of very, very micro indie comic book creators and stores, etc. They've found their own way to distribute. They found their little niches, and I'm starting to find out a little more of them, that there's more of these places popping up. Even Quimby's popped up on my radar today, thanks to John DaCosta. And just looking at their website, which I did for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, just kind of had a quick browse through a lot of underground and small press books that they're helping distribute, right? So and I guess the only step that's missing still in that is getting those books to me here, say in Canada, easier, because again, Damien touched on the fact that if you're going to now have multiple people, that means your order is going to be less from each of those, which means that your shipping price is going to be higher per book, because you're not going to kind of one source to buy a shit ton of books. You now have to go to 5 different sources and buy a smaller amount of books, and each of those places, that's going to raise your prices, basically. Yeah, so it's interesting to think about. I don't think anything's going anywhere anytime soon, but I do think that while we're seeing these changes, I think we're going to see more as they come. And again, speaking as someone who's not tapped into kind of the Marvel DC, or at least that's not my driving force for it, in a way, I wouldn't be sad to see some space on the shelf when I go to the comic shops. The main comic shop that I have my pull list at, Galaxy Comics, they have a lot of indie books. They absolutely do. There's a lot of DC and there's a lot of Marvel too. If those started paring down because people decided that they wanted to get out of doing as many comics, if that's the way things go for Marvel and DC, I'd welcome the space on the shelves to see more indie books, because they do pull quite a few, and even so much so that they have the dedicated space to Marvel and DC. The indie has its dedicated space, but sometimes they have them alphabetized, the new ones. They'll have a couple of different titles stacked with kind of dividers, so you'll have to flip. So you may see a stack of books and it might have 2 different titles in that stack, and then sometimes the previous month's issue behind that, right? So this would allow them to spread out a little more. And the final thing that was interesting, and I'm curious now to talk to some of my shops about it, to see how they're doing with back issue sales. He was talking about, I think he said Cloud9 Comics is the one that he was talking to the owner about, that the back issue sales have gone up for him. And I'm wondering if that's true across the board. I haven't really paid attention to that. I know that in kind of the groups that I'm part of, the Facebook groups that I'm part of, I don't know why I'm looking there. They're not here in the room with me. The kind of the auctions and the books that are being sold in those groups, the older books, it definitely has risen during this pandemic. Now, if that's translating to the comic shops here locally, I wouldn't be surprised, because people are still offering curbside, and people, we're having this brief period of time where shops are open. The restrictions are coming in, but so I'd be curious to see how that's going, and who's buying those comics. Even in my own immediate circle, there's two people that I know from work who are getting back into collecting comics, and they're driven. I can see that they're driven, but some of the things that they're driven towards reading them and kind of recapturing part of their youth, absolutely. But I do feel like in the brief conversations I've had with them, there is also a drive to kind of get the key books, whether that's because they just want them for their own collection or whether they want to flip them, I can't say, but it feels like there's a definite focus on that as well. So I wonder how that's kind of working across the board for people, the people that are coming back into it. When we won't get into the conversation of who's reading versus who's speculating. I mean, I think that that's always been something where those numbers are not definitive, that there's always been people who just aren't reading their books versus a lot of people that are reading their books. I think those are always sort of floating around the same, depending on where you are. I mean, sure, at times one will bubble to the surface a little more, and I think right now the speculators are bubbling to the surface a little more than the readers. There's a definite lag here, so I hope that this is going here. I'm going to try to wrap it up here in 30 seconds. But I just wanted to say congratulations again to Sleepy Reader 666. If you're not subscribed to him, you should be subscribed to him. He's one of the first guys, and I've said this many times before, he's one of the first guys I watched here on YouTube, and one of the main people amongst a small handful that seeing their videos really made me want to do exactly what I'm doing now, contribute. The only thing we're missing is the sound of the focus on the camera from my early videos, but really made me want to contribute in a way of sitting in front of a camera and talking to myself in a room, which still sometimes feels strange, but there you go. And I think it's been a really great thing. It's been really enjoyable. It's brought out different parts of the hobby and just been nice to talk to people with a lot better grasp of the history than I could ever even dream of. So it's been really great to kind of tap into that knowledge and get exposure to a bunch of books that have all put the strain on all of our wallets over the years. So congratulations, Damien, 9 years. And that's it, everybody. Thanks. We'll talk to you.